I lost my daughter for 11 days. Margot called me from a stranger's phone at a DHS office, sobbing so hard I couldn't make out the words. They stripped my parenting license review 3 hours after it was filed. They froze my pickup at Montessori on a Tuesday. All because I said no to Easter dinner. My name is Laura Fontaine, 34, landscape architect, New Orleans. 5 months ago, I told my mother-in-law I wouldn't host her Easter brunch. One sentence. Cameron, I can't host this year. But by the time I walked into that courtroom on a Thursday in June, Cameron Fontaine wasn't just losing a holiday. She was about to watch her own words read back to her from a screen she forgot I could see. And her son, my husband, was sitting on her side. If this story already has you needing to know what happened inside that courtroom, hit subscribe and turn on notifications now, because what Cameron did in those 5 months, and what I did back, that's a story you'll want to hear from the beginning. And honestly, by the end, you might look at your own family group chats a little differently. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I want to know who's here with me for this one. Let me take you back to the Sunday in January when Cameron first brought up Easter. We were at her house on Britannia Street. Not a big house, but Cameron kept it spotless. White tablecloth on the dining table even for a regular Sunday lunch. Candles lit at noon. I'd designed that garden myself 2 years earlier. The jasmine along the side fence, the crepe myrtles by the front steps, the little herb border she used for Sunday cooking. Cameron had asked me to do it the summer after the wedding, and I said yes, because that's what I did back then. I said yes. My husband Declan was cutting cornbread for Margot while I set out the greens. Cameron was at the head of the table, which, I know that sounds like a small thing, but that was Cameron. She sat at the head even in other people's houses. Margot was 4. Just turned 4 in November. She had this habit of singing to herself while she ate, this tuneless little hum, and Cameron would always say, "Margot, ladies don't sing at the table." Every time. Margot would go quiet for maybe 30 seconds and then start again because she was 4. I loved Sundays there, actually. I know that sounds weird given everything I'm about to tell you, but for the first 3 years of my marriage, those lunches were the only time Declan seemed fully present. He'd talk, he'd laugh, he'd hold Margot on his lap. It was only at Cameron's table that he seemed like himself again, the Declan I'd married. So when Cameron said, "Laura, I want to talk about Easter," I didn't think anything of it. She said she wanted to do something bigger this year, invite the Thibodeau cousins, maybe rent tables for the backyard. 26 people. And then she looked at me and said, "I think your place would be perfect. You'll host." Not asked, told. And here's the thing about Cameron. She had this way of giving you instructions disguised as compliments. Your place would be perfect really meant, I've decided and you'll do it. She'd been doing this since Declan and I got engaged. My wedding venue, my registry, my baby shower theme, everything was Cameron's decision delivered as a suggestion. But this time was different. I'd been working 60-hour weeks on a waterfront project in Algiers Point. My firm had just given me the lead on the biggest contract we'd landed in 2 years, a $1.4 million public park redesign. I was sleeping maybe 5 hours a night. Margot was in the middle of a sleep regression, and Cameron wanted me to cook for 26 people. I said no. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just said, "Cameron, I can't host this year. Work is really intense right now. Maybe we could do it at your place, or we could rent somewhere." The table went quiet. Declan stopped cutting cornbread. Margot kept humming. Cameron set her fork down. She looked at me the way you'd look at someone who just said something embarrassing in public. Not angry, more like she felt sorry for me. And she said, "I see." That was it. "I see." 2 words. And then she changed the subject to Margot's preschool. But when we got to the car, Declan turned to me before he even started the engine and said, "Why would you do that to her?" And then, this part caught me off guard, he laughed. Short, quiet, aimed at the windshield. Not a real laugh. More like a sound you make when you're already rehearsing someone else's argument. He said, "She spent all week planning this." And I said, "She spent all week deciding." He didn't answer that. He just started the car. 72 hours after I said no, my phone had 41 unread messages in the Fontaine Family Circle group chat. I know the exact number because I screenshotted every one of them. That habit saved my life. The Fontaine Family Circle was a group text Cameron had created when Declan and I got married. 23 members. Extended family, cousins, Cameron's church friends she considered family. It was the nerve center of everything Fontaine. And Cameron was the administrator. I opened the messages Monday morning at work. The first one was from Cameron's sister, Jolene. "Heard Laura can't be bothered with Easter. Guess some people are too busy for family." Then Declan's cousin, Trey. "Cameron does everything for that girl, and she can't even host one dinner?" Then Cameron herself. And this, I remember this word for word. She wrote, "I'm not upset. I just think when someone marries into a family, they should want to be part of it. But everyone has their own priorities." She wasn't lying about me. I want to be clear about that. She wasn't saying I was crazy or unstable. She just reported what I did. Lara said she can't host, and let the family's natural reaction do the rest. That's the thing about boundary punishment. The person doesn't have to lie. The boundary itself is treated as the crime. By Wednesday, I'd been tagged in 14 separate messages. Jolene called me too good for the family. Trey said I was pulling Declan away. Cameron's church friend Bertil sent a message that said, "Praying for Cameron's heart during this difficult season." As if I'd given the woman cancer instead of declining to make jambalaya for 26 people. Declan was getting quieter at home. He'd come in from work at the Port Authority, eat dinner without talking, then go to the spare room to call his mother. I could hear his voice through the wall, but not the words. On Thursday night, he came out and said, "My mother cried today. She said she's never felt so disrespected." I said, "Declan, I said I couldn't host. That's all I said." He shook his head. "You know how she is. It's not about the dinner. It's about what it means." "What does it mean?" "That you don't want to be part of this family." I stood there in the hallway holding a basket of Margot's laundry and I thought, okay, this is it. This is the thing I've been sensing for 3 years. The thing I couldn't name. The boundary isn't the problem. My existence outside Cameron's control is the problem. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "I'm going to bed." And I went to our room and sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time. The next Sunday, I went to Cameron's house for lunch like normal. I brought a pie. Sweet potato. Her favorite. She took it at the door without looking at me and said, "Thank you," the way you'd thank a delivery driver. At the table, every conversation was directed around me. Not at me, around me. Cameron asked Declan about his week. Cameron asked Margot about preschool. Cameron asked about the weather, the garden, the church fundraiser. She looked through me. 11 people at that table, and I was invisible. Margot noticed. Kids always notice. She tugged on my sleeve and said, "Mama, Carmel didn't say hi to you." Cameron smiled at Margot and said, "Carmel is just tired today, sweetheart." That was the first week. 51 days left before the courtroom. I didn't know there would be a courtroom yet. All I knew was that Cameron's silence was louder than anything she'd ever said out loud. February was strange. Cameron didn't yell, didn't call me names. She just withdrew. And everyone around her withdrew too. Not all at once, but in small moves. Jolene stopped replying to my texts about Margot's birthday planning. Trey walked past me at a family event and said, "Hey," without stopping. Sunday lunches continued, but my place at the table shrank. Declan would sit between me and Cameron now, and I noticed he always angled his chair toward her. The Fontaine family circle kept buzzing. Cameron started posting family photos, old ones, Easter brunches from before I was in the picture. Remember this? 2018. The whole family together. Those were good times. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Then she posted one from 2019, the first Easter I'd attended, and the caption just said, "Full house." I was in the photo. I was standing at the edge of the frame, holding a casserole dish. She didn't tag me. Declan and I had our worst fight on a Tuesday in February. I'd asked him to pick up Margot from Montessori because I had a site visit in Gretna that ran late. He forgot. He just forgot. When I called the school at 5:47 p.m., they told me Margot had been waiting for 40 minutes, and that Cameron had been called as the emergency contact. Cameron had picked her up. When I got to Cameron's house to get Margot, Cameron opened the door with Margot on her hip. Margot was wearing a dress I'd never seen, pink with lace trim, something Cameron must have bought. Cameron said, "She was so scared when nobody came. I had to calm her down for 20 minutes. Thank you for picking her up," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. "Of course," Cameron said. "I'll always be here when you can't." That sentence, it sounds generous, right? I'll always be here when you can't. Say it out loud. It sounds like a gift. But standing on that porch, holding my daughter, what I heard was, I'm watching, I'm counting, and I'm keeping score. My jaw locked. I held Margot tighter and I felt her little hand pat my shoulder, the way I pat hers when she's upset. 4 years old and already reading the room better than anyone at that table on Sundays. Would you have said something back? Or would you have done what I did? Taken your daughter, buckled her into the car seat, and cried in the Walgreens parking lot on Magazine Street for 15 minutes? I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments, because what happened next made that moment look like nothing. 39 days. I started counting without knowing I was counting. March hit, and Cameron shifted tactics. She stopped being silent and started being concerned. That's the word she used. Concerned. She was concerned about my work hours. She was concerned about Margot's nutrition. She was concerned about Declan's happiness. She sent a message to the Fontaine family circle on March 3rd at 9:14 p.m. I don't want to overstep, but I'm worried about Margot. Lara has been working so much lately. I just want to make sure that baby is getting what she needs. 16 people liked that message. 16. And I want to pause here because this is where it gets hard. I've always been a good mother. I'm not perfect, and I don't pretend to be. Margot eats vegetables I grow in our backyard. She has a bedtime routine that takes 45 minutes because we read 2 books, and she tells me about her day using a feelings chart her teacher made. I take her to the park on Saturdays. I braid her hair every morning. I know her favorite color changes weekly, and that right now it's golden like bees. But Cameron took that message, I'm worried about Margot, and she planted a seed. She didn't say I was a bad mother. She said she was worried. And worried is worse than an accusation because you can't defend against worry. You can't say, I'm not neglecting my child, without sounding defensive. You can't prove a negative. Declan came home that night and said, Mom thinks maybe Margot should spend more time at her place during the week, just while you're busy with the project. No, Lara. No, Margot is fine. Margot is happy. This isn't about Margot. He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, and I remember this word for word because I replayed it in my head for weeks. My mother raised 3 kids while running a house and never once complained about it being too much. Maybe the problem isn't the workload, Lara. Maybe the problem is that you're just not built for all of it. I looked at him. My husband. The man who forgot to pick up his own daughter 3 weeks ago. Standing in my kitchen, in the house my salary mostly paid for, telling me I wasn't built for motherhood because his mother told him to say it. And for a second, I'm going to be honest, for a second I wondered if he was right. I'd been sleeping 5 hours. My eyes burned by 3 p.m. every day. Margot had asked me twice that week why I was always on my computer. Maybe Cameron was seeing something I couldn't. Maybe I was taking on too much. And everyone around me could tell except me. That thought lasted about 90 seconds. Then I looked at the refrigerator. Meal prepped lunches for the week, labeled with Margot's name and a little smiley face. I looked at the reading log on the counter. 23 books in February. Every one of them noted in my handwriting. No, Cameron wasn't worried about Margot. Cameron was worried about losing control. I didn't yell. I just said, "Get out of this kitchen." He left, and I opened my phone, screenshotted that entire Fontaine family circle thread, and saved it to a folder I named Insurance. I didn't know what I'd need it for yet, but I knew I'd need it. 28 days. The Algiers Point project was in final review. I'd spent 14 months on the design. Native plantings, rain gardens, a community pavilion overlooking the river. My boss, a man named Wendell Pruitt, who'd been in the industry for 30 years, told me it was the best public submission our firm had produced since he took over. And at home, everything was falling apart. Cameron had started calling Margot's preschool, not to check on Margot, to check on me. She called on March 8th and asked the director, Ms. Tran, whether Margot seemed different lately. She called again on March 12th and asked if the home environment seemed stable. Ms. Tran told me about the calls because she was required to, and because she could see that Margot was fine. "Mrs. Fontaine," Ms. Tran said to me in the hallway at pickup, "your daughter is thriving. She's one of the happiest kids in the class. I want you to know that." I thanked her. I drove home. I screenshotted the call log Ms. Tran had emailed me and added it to the insurance folder. On March 15th, Cameron escalated again. She sent a message to the Fontaine family circle, this time not about me directly. She wrote, "Family meeting this Saturday at my house. Important matters to discuss. Please make every effort to attend." I wasn't invited. Declan told me about it on Thursday night and said, "It's just family stuff. Mom wants to talk about some property things." "I'm family, Declan. You know what I mean." I knew exactly what he meant. I wasn't going to that meeting, but I also wasn't going to pretend it wasn't happening. That Saturday, while Declan drove to Cameron's house on Britannia Street, I took Margot to Audubon Park. We fed the ducks. She named one Gerald. I sat on a bench while she ran circles around a live oak tree, and I called a lawyer. Her name was Rhonda Kavanaugh. She had an office on Poydras Street, Suite 714, and she'd been recommended by a colleague at my firm who'd gone through a custody modification 2 years earlier. Rhonda picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. The group chat, the calls to Montessori, the family meeting I'd been excluded from, the boundary I'd set, and the 5 weeks of punishment that followed. Rhonda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have all those screenshots?" "Every single one." "How many?" 117 as of this morning. "Keep saving them. Every one. Don't delete a thing. And Laura, do not tell Declan you've called me. Would you have gone to that family meeting? Even uninvited? Or would you have done what I did? Gone to the park, called a lawyer, and started building a case? I want to hear what you would have done. Tell me in the comments. Because what Cameron did 17 days from now made this whole chapter look like nothing, and I need you here for that part. 17 days. The clock was ticking and I didn't know it yet, but Cameron did. Whatever happened at that family meeting, it changed the temperature. Declan came home that night and didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not a word. He slept in the guest room. He made his own coffee. He kissed Margot good morning and walked past me in the hallway. But on the second day of his silence, something small happened. He was washing Margot's sippy cup at the sink, and I walked in to get water. He didn't leave the room. He just kept washing. And then he said, without looking up, "Mom wants me to file for temporary custody." I stopped. She has a lawyer. She says I should file before you do. He turned off the faucet. He still didn't look at me. I told her I needed to think about it. For a moment, one stupid, hopeful moment, I thought he was coming around. I thought maybe Declan was starting to see it, starting to pull away from Cameron, starting to choose his wife and his daughter over his mother's agenda. On the fourth day, he left a document on the kitchen counter. It was a printed custody agreement, not from a lawyer, just something downloaded from the internet. It proposed that Cameron have Margot every Wednesday and every other weekend. At the bottom, in Cameron's handwriting, "This is what's best for Margot right now." The handwriting wasn't steady. The B in best was rewritten. She'd crossed it out and started over. There was a coffee ring on the top right corner of the page, overlapping the word custody. I noticed these things because my hands were completely still, and I had nothing to do with them except look. I drove to Rhonda's office that afternoon during my lunch break. I put the custody document on her desk. She read it, looked up at me, and said, "This has no legal standing, but the intent behind it does." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your mother-in-law is building a case. These school calls, this group chat, this custody proposal. She's creating a paper trail that paints you as an unfit parent. And the fact that your husband is participating means he's either on board or he's too deep under her control to resist." I sat in that chair in suite 714, and I thought about Margot singing at the dinner table. Ladies don't sing at the table. I thought about Cameron buying her that pink lace dress. I thought about Declan forgetting to pick her up, and Cameron swooping in 40 minutes later with a smile. "What do?" I said. Rhonda leaned back and rubbed her eyes. She looked tired. I found out later she'd been in court that morning on a different case, a nasty one involving grandparent visitation rights that had gone badly. She caught herself and sat up straight. "Okay, here's the thing about women like your—" She stopped, shook her head, started over in her lawyer voice. "You do exactly what she's doing, except you do it better, and you do it with a lawyer." That was the day I started building. Rhonda filed a preliminary motion for a protective order based on harassment and interference with parental rights. She subpoenaed the Fontaine Family Circle group chat through Declan's phone carrier. She contacted Ms. Tran at Montessori for a formal statement. She requested Cameron's call logs to the school. I went home that night and cooked dinner. I gave Margot a bath. I read her Goodnight Moon and The Giving Tree. And when Declan came in at 10 p.m. and walked past me without a word, I said nothing, because now I had a plan. 9 days. I actually laughed this morning trying to figure out how to tell this next part, because what Cameron did 9 days before the hearing was so absurd, so over the top, that if I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it either. She called Child Protective Services. She called CPS and reported concerns about child welfare at our address. She said Margot had been acting out and that she was worried about the home environment. She told them I worked excessive hours and that she'd observed Margot being unsupervised on multiple occasions. She gave them our address, Margot's full name, her school, her doctor. The caseworker showed up on a Friday morning at 8:15 a.m. I was making Margot's oatmeal. Declan had already left for work. The woman, I won't give her name, she was just doing her job, asked to see the house. She checked the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. She asked about Margot's routine, her meals, her sleep schedule, her medical records. Margot came out of her room holding a stuffed elephant and said, "Are you looking for something? I can help." The caseworker smiled. She spent 40 minutes with us. She noted that the house was clean, the refrigerator was full, Margot's immunizations were current, and the child was, her words, well-adjusted, articulate, and clearly bonded with her mother. She asked me one question before she left. "Do you have any idea who filed this report?" "Yes," I said. "I do." When the caseworker left, I sat on the kitchen floor. Margot climbed into my lap and said, "Mama, you look tired." "I am tired, baby. Want to hear my duck song? The one about Gerald?" "Yeah. Sing me the duck song." She sang. It wasn't really words, just sounds. But she sang, and I held her, and I called Rhonda from the kitchen floor. Rhonda said 2 words. "We accelerate." But accelerating didn't mean the damage stopped. 2 days after the CPS visit, Montessori called. Ms. Tran's voice was careful, apologetic even. She said that because of the active CPS report, the school's policy required a review of all authorized pickup contacts. My name hadn't been removed. Not yet. But it was flagged. She said, "It's precautionary, Mrs. Fontaine. It'll resolve when the case closes." It didn't resolve in a day. The DHS review, triggered by Cameron's report, froze my pickup authorization for 9 days. 9 days where I drove to that school every afternoon and sat in the parking lot while Declan or Cameron's designated contact, Jolene, walked my daughter to a car that wasn't mine. On day 3, Margot saw my car through the window and waved. I waved back. On day 4, she didn't look. On day 6, she called me from a DHS office phone. They'd brought her in for a routine welfare interview connected to the open case, and she was crying so hard I couldn't understand what she was saying except, "Mama, come get me." I couldn't. Not legally. Not until the review cleared. It took 11 days total. 11 days where my daughter was right there, 2 blocks away, in a school I enrolled her in a city I'd built a life in, and I couldn't pick her up. The hearing date was set, June 13th, 9 days from the CPS visit. Everything I'd been building since that park bench in March was about to land in one room. And here's the part that I need to be honest about this. I need you to understand what I was about to do. I was about to walk into a courtroom and end my marriage. I wasn't fighting for a compromise. I wasn't trying to get Cameron to change. I was filing for separation, a restraining order against Cameron, and a temporary custody modification giving me sole custody of Margot until a full hearing could be held. I was about to blow up my family on purpose. You think calling CPS was the worst of it? Subscribe. Because what I walked into on June 13th, 4 days before the hearing, I had 17 pages of evidence organized in a blue binder. Rhonda had printed everything. 131 screenshots from the Fontaine family circle, organized by date. Ms. Tran's sworn statement about Cameron's calls. The CPS visit report, cleared with the caseworker's notes about the home being safe and stable. The DHS pickup freeze documentation. 9 days of restricted access. Every school sign-in sheet showing someone else's name where mine should have been. Declan's silence documented through text message timestamps. 47 days without a single initiating text to me. The printed custody agreement with Cameron's handwriting. My work evaluations showing I'd been promoted twice in 3 years. Margot's pediatric records showing perfect health checkups every 6 months. 17 pages. Every page was a sentence Cameron had written in that group chat. Every page was a call she'd made. Every page was a boundary she'd punished. Rhonda looked at the binder and said, "This is airtight, but I want you to understand. The judge will see everything, including the messages from Declan. I know. He's not just a bystander in this, Laura. The silence, the custody document, the family meeting. Legally, he's been participating in a pattern of harassment by proxy. I know that too." Rhonda flipped to page 9. The screenshot from March 3rd. Cameron's worried about Margot message. She tapped it. Are you sure this is word for word? I just want to make sure that baby is getting what she needs. Could she have said the baby instead of that baby? I pulled up the original screenshot on my phone, zoomed in. That baby. Exact words. Rhonda nodded. Good. I had to ask. For a second, I doubted myself. Was it that or the? But there it was on the screen. Cameron's words, time-stamped, carrier verified. I wasn't misremembering. I wasn't exaggerating. Everything I'd felt for 5 months was right there in black and white. I went home. Margot was at Cameron's, a scheduled visit that Declan had arranged without asking me, which was also documented. I sat in my living room on Annunciation Street, and I looked at the house I'd painted the shutters on. The garden I'd designed myself, jasmine along the fence, dwarf citrus in the corner, a rain garden by the front walk that collected runoff from the roof. Same hands that had designed Cameron's garden on Prytania Street. Same eye for what would grow, what would last, what needed cutting back. 9 years of my career had taught me how to build things that lasted. And now, I was about to tear something down. There's something I've been meaning to say, and I think right now is the right place for it. You can build the most beautiful life, plant the garden, paint the shutters, sing to your daughter every night, and still lose it. Not because you failed, because someone decided your boundary was more offensive than their behavior. That's the thing I know now that I didn't know in January. Boundaries don't cause punishment. They reveal who was already willing to punish you. Would you have walked into that courtroom, knowing Declan would be on her side? Knowing your daughter's future was in the hands of a judge who'd never met her? Tell me in the comments, would you have gone through with it? Because the hearing is 3 days away, and I need you to understand something. Everything I'm about to describe happened in one room, in one morning, and nothing was the same after. 3 days before the hearing, Cameron sent one final message to the Fontaine family circle. It said, "Please keep our family in your prayers this week. Some people choose themselves over their families, and all we can do is love them anyway." 14 people hearted that message. My husband was one of them. Rhonda added it to the binder. Page 18, June 13th, 6:47 a.m. I woke up before my alarm. The house was quiet. Declan had slept in the guest room again. 49th night in a row. Margot was at Cameron's because Declan had taken her there the night before, saying, "Mom wants to do her hair for church tomorrow." There was no church. I knew there was no church because it was a Thursday. I showered. I put on a navy blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop on Magazine Street 2 weeks earlier. I braided my hair in a single plait down my back. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, and I remember thinking, you look like someone who knows what she's doing. I hoped that was true. 7:32 a.m. I drove to Rhonda's office. We went over the filing one more time. She asked me if I wanted coffee. I said no. She asked me if I was ready. I said, I've been ready since the Walgreens parking lot. 8:45 a.m. Orleans Parish Civil District Court, Room 3C. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. Rhonda carried the binder. I carried nothing. My hands were free. 9:02 a.m. I saw Declan first. He was sitting in the front row, wearing a tie I'd given him for his birthday. Cameron was next to him. She was wearing a cream-colored dress and a gold cross necklace. She looked like she was going to brunch. She had a lawyer, a man named something Bro, I don't remember his first name, and he was arranging papers at the respondent's table. Cameron saw me, and her face didn't change. She just lifted her chin slightly and looked away. I don't remember exactly when the judge came in. It could have been 5 minutes later. It could have been 15. I was looking at the water pitcher on the table. Someone had left a ring on the wood. I traced it with my finger until Rhonda touched my elbow. 9:15 a.m., I think. Judge Adeline Marchand entered. She was maybe 60, silver hair, wireframe glasses. She sat down and opened the file. Rhonda stood up and presented the petition. She spoke for 11 minutes. She laid out the timeline. January 7th boundary, the group chat campaign, the school calls, the family meeting exclusion, the silence, the printed custody agreement, the CPS report. She presented each screenshot with dates and participant names. She played an audio recording Ms. Tran had made of Cameron's third phone call to the school, where Cameron said, "And this is exact. I just need someone to understand that this child is not in a safe environment. Her mother prioritizes her career over her daughter." The courtroom was quiet. Cameron's lawyer objected twice. Judge Marchand overruled both times. And then Rhonda did the thing I'd been waiting for. She pulled up the Fontaine Family Circle chat log. Not my screenshots, but the carrier subpoenaed version. The complete, unedited record. 347 messages over 5 months. Every word Cameron had typed. Every reaction. Every prayer request that was really a targeted campaign. Every hearted response from Declan. She projected it on a screen, and as the judge began reading, she asked the question, the one that ended it. Cameron's face changed. I watched it happen in real time. She went from composed to confused to something I don't have a word for. She looked at that screen like it was a stranger, like she couldn't believe her own words existed outside the group chat, in a public room, on a screen a judge was reading. Judge Marchand looked up and said, "Mrs. Fontaine, the elder, Mrs. Fontaine, did you contact Child Protective Services regarding your granddaughter?" Cameron's lawyer started to speak. Cameron put her hand on his arm and said, "I was worried about my granddaughter." "Were you worried before or after your daughter-in-law declined to host Easter dinner?" The room went dead silent. Cameron opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Declan shifted in his seat. Cameron's lawyer wrote something on his legal pad. Judge Marchand continued, "Because according to this timeline, the one on the screen right now, your first expression of concern about the child's welfare occurred on March 3rd, 55 days after the dinner refusal, and 0 days before that. There are no prior communications suggesting concern about the child. Is that correct?" Cameron said, "I've always been concerned. Your text messages suggest otherwise. They suggest the concern began when a boundary was set." I sat there. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But something cracked inside my chest. Not relief. Not triumph. Something heavier. I was watching my marriage end in a courtroom. I was watching the man I'd loved for 7 years sit next to the woman who'd tried to take my daughter. And I was glad I was there. Both of those things were true at the same time. Rhonda presented the CPS report. Cleared. She presented Ms. Tran's statement. Child, thriving. She presented my work record, my home inspection readiness, Margot's medical file. And then she said, "Your Honor, we're requesting a temporary restraining order against Cameron Fontaine, prohibiting contact with the minor child and the petitioner, a temporary sole custody modification, and an order for the respondent, Declan Fontaine, to vacate the marital home pending the full custody hearing." Cameron stood up. Her lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she stood up and she looked directly at me. And she said, "You're destroying this family. Everything I did was for Margot. Everything I did was because I loved that child more than you ever could." Judge Marchand said, "Mrs. Fontaine, sit down." Cameron sat down. Her hands were shaking. The gold cross necklace caught the courtroom light. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. She granted temporary sole custody. She ordered Declan to vacate within 48 hours. She scheduled the full hearing for August 19th, 10:41 a.m. I walked out of room 3C, Rhonda beside me. In the hallway, Cameron, crying. Not the quiet, strategic tears I'd seen her use at Sunday lunches. Real crying. The sound of someone whose world just got rearranged without her permission. I knew that sound. I'd made it in a Walgreens parking lot 4 months ago. I drove home from the courthouse. I parked in the driveway and sat in the car for 6 minutes with the engine off. The steering wheel was hot. A mockingbird was going through its whole repertoire in the live oak by the front steps. I went inside. I washed the breakfast dishes I'd left in the sink that morning. I folded a load of Margot's laundry. I called Montessori and confirmed pickup for 3 p.m. My name, my authorization, fully reinstated. Declan came to the house on Annunciation Street that evening to pack a bag. He didn't look at me. He went to the bedroom, filled a duffel, and came back to the living room where I was sitting with Margot. Margot said, "Daddy, are you going on a trip?" He knelt down and said, "Just for a little while, Bug." "Like a sleepover?" "Yeah, like a sleepover." He stood up and for a second, just a second, he looked at me, and I saw something. Not anger, not hatred, something closer to confusion. Like he'd woken up in a room he didn't recognize and couldn't figure out how he got there. He picked up the duffel bag. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he said, "I didn't think it would go this way." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I don't think he did either. I think he thought Cameron would win because Cameron always won. He left at 7:23 p.m. Margot waved from the window. I put Margot to bed at 8. We read 2 books. She told me about Gerald and a new duck she'd spotted at the park. "Gerald's cousin, Mama. His name is also Gerald." She fell asleep mid-sentence, the way 4-year-olds do, like someone just turned off the switch. I closed her door. I walked to the kitchen. I stood at the sink. My hands were shaking. Not during the hearing. Not during Declan's packing. Not once all day. But now, standing alone in my own kitchen with the faucet dripping, and the house empty of everything except my daughter breathing down the hall. Now, my knees didn't buckle. I just leaned forward until my forehead touched the cabinet above the sink. I stayed there. I don't know how long. Long enough that when I straightened up, there was a mark on the wood from my skin. I wasn't sobbing. It was quieter than that. It was the sound you make when you've been holding your breath for 5 months, and you finally stop. The Fontaine Family Circle group chat exploded. I couldn't see it anymore. Rhonda had advised me to leave the group. But Declan's cousin Trey called me at 9 p.m. and said, "You just made a huge mistake. Cameron is family. You're not." I hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout spread. Cameron's church community learned about the restraining order. Not from me, from Cameron herself. She told them I'd gotten a judge to ban a grandmother from seeing her own grandchild. She framed it as persecution. Bertil started a prayer chain for Cameron on Facebook. 14 people shared it. But here's what Cameron didn't know. She didn't know that Judge Marchand had also ordered a guardian ad litem to interview Margot. The guardian, a woman named Patrice somebody, I only met her twice, came to our house on a Wednesday afternoon. She played with Margot for 30 minutes. She asked Margot questions about her day, her school, her home. Margot said, "I like it when Mama picks me up. Claude always tells me to be quiet in the car, but Mama lets me sing." Patrice wrote that down. She also interviewed Cameron. I don't know exactly what was said, but I know this. Cameron's interview lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. And afterward, Rhonda told me that Patrice's preliminary report noted a pattern of boundary violation and enmeshment between the grandmother and grandchild that warrants continued restriction of unsupervised contact. Cameron had walked into that interview the same way she walked into every room, certain she was the most reasonable person in it. And for the first time, a professional saw through it. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. But there's something about watching someone who's controlled the narrative for years meet a person who reads narratives for a living. Cameron's playbook didn't work on someone trained to spot it. 3 months later, September, Margot started pre-K at a new school, a small one in the Irish Channel, 2 blocks from our house. She wore a yellow backpack with a frog patch I'd sewn on myself. She walked through the front door holding my hand, and she said, "Mama, do you think they'll let me sing here?" "Baby, I will personally make sure of it." The full custody hearing in August had gone in my favor. Mostly. Rhonda had warned me that the Guardian's report, while strongly supportive, could be challenged on one procedural point. Patrice had interviewed Cameron without Cameron's attorney present, and Bro had filed a motion to strike portions of the interview. Judge Marchand denied the motion, but it added 11 days to the process. 11 more days of waiting, of checking my email every hour, of Margot asking when things would be normal again. The outcome was the same, but the path to it had a bump I hadn't expected. Judge Marchand reviewed the Guardian's report, the continued documentation, and Cameron's Facebook prayer campaign, which Rhonda had argued demonstrated ongoing public harassment. Declan had been offered supervised visitation twice a week. Cameron was restricted to supervised visits once a month at a designated facility. Declan moved into an apartment in Metairie. He called Margot every other night. The conversations were short, 5 minutes, sometimes 7. Margot would tell him about Gerald the duck, and he'd say, "That's cool, bug." I could hear him trying. "I don't know if he'll get there. That's not my job anymore." I got the Algiers Point project approved in August. The groundbreaking ceremony was September 4th. Wendell came, and the city council member for the district, and a photographer from the Times-Picayune. I stood in front of the site, a 2-acre lot overlooking the Mississippi, and I thought about the garden on Annunciation Street, the jasmine, the citrus trees, and I thought about the garden on Britannia Street, the one I'd designed for Cameron. I drove past it the week before. The jasmine was overgrown. The crepe myrtles needed pruning. The herb border was half weeds. Nobody was maintaining it. The woman who'd built it wasn't welcome there anymore. I started therapy in July. Dr. Achilles' office on St. Charles Avenue, Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. Margot goes to a play therapy group on Saturdays. I don't know if any of this will fix everything. I don't think fixed is the right word anyway, but I sleep through the night now. And when Margot sings at the dinner table, nobody tells her to stop. My mother called me from Baton Rouge in mid-September. We aren't super close. She and my father split when I was 12 and she drove across the state. But she called and she said, "I heard what happened with Cameron." "Who told you?" "Jolene. She called me to tell me what a mistake you were making." I told her she was the one making mistake. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I've called. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me for believing you, Laura." But I did, because for 5 months, nobody had. It's October now. The morning I'm recording this, and yeah, I'm actually recording this on a Saturday morning, Margot is asleep in her room. The husky quiet. Not the oppressive quiet of someone's disapproval, just quiet, the kind where you can hear the birds outside and the coffee maker doing its thing, and that's it. I sat down at the kitchen table this morning with my coffee, and I looked at the chair where Declan used to sit. It's Margot's chair now. She sits there and colors while I make breakfast. She leaves crayon marks on the placemat, and I don't wipe them off. Cameron sends letters through her lawyer. They're formal, careful, full of phrases her attorney clearly wrote. The last one said she was open to rebuilding the relationship in a supervised setting. Rhonda said I don't have to respond. I haven't decided if I will. Maybe someday. Maybe not. That's mine to decide now. The Fontaine Family Circle group chat still exists. I don't know what they say in it anymore. Trey sent me an email in September. Not a text, an email. That said, "You went too far." I didn't reply. Jolene blocked me on everything, which is fine because I didn't have her number saved anyway. Bertiel's prayer chain eventually stopped. I don't know if Cameron still goes to that church. I don't need to know. Declan showed up for his supervised visit last Tuesday. He brought Margot a coloring book with butterflies. She hugged him and said,
"Daddy, look! I lost a tooth!"
He smiled. A real smile. The first real one I'd seen from him in a long time. I don't hate him. I want to be clear about that. I don't hate Declan. I think he got swallowed by something bigger than him. Something that started long before I ever entered that family. But that's his work to do, not mine. I did my work in a courtroom on a Thursday in June. And you know what? I want to thank you for being here through all of this. I mean that. Telling this story it's a lot. There are parts I had to pause and just breathe through. And knowing somebody's on the other end listening makes it feel less like talking to a wall and more like talking to someone who gets it. If you made it this far, if you stayed for the whole thing, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone who's been called selfish for saying no, or someone who's sitting in the middle of their own 5 months right now and doesn't know it gets better. Because it does. It gets different. And then it gets better. And I want to ask you something. Has anyone ever punished you for a boundary? Not a dramatic one. Not a big defiant stand. Just a regular, ordinary no. And did the punishment teach you something about who they were? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one of them. If you want more stories from people who found their way out of impossible situations, there's more on this channel. I promise they're worth your time. I'm going to go wake up Margot now. We're going to the farmer's market on Magazine Street. She wants to find Gerald. She's convinced there's a duck at every body of water in New Orleans, and they're all Gerald. My first Saturday in my own house, with my own daughter, on my own terms. I didn't know what would come next, but this time, it was mine to decide.